In this fourth chapter, we will be discussing some matters of social importance surrounding the parliamentary system in Sri Lanka, mainly representation in parliament. 52% of Sri Lankans are women, but how much of women representation do we have in parliament? There is a large chunk of youth that come into the voter base every year. How far are they represented in parliament? This chapter will delve into these matters. Let's start off with women representation in parliament. In Sri Lanka, women have been members of the legislature since its inception. For instance, Mrs. Adeline Molmure was the first woman to be elected to the first state council back in 1931 that lasted until 1935 under the Donoughmore Constitution. She was later joined by Naisam Sarvanamuthu, who won her seat at a by-election held in the year 1932. Here's a short look into the life of the first woman to enter the legislature of Sri Lanka, Mrs. Adeline Molmure. Mrs. Adeline Molmure entered the pre-independence State Council in 1931 after winning a by-election necessitated by the death of her father, J.H. Mideniya Adiga, who had been elected to the seat at a general election earlier that year. She was later elected to the Senate in the year 1947 and was appointed as a Deputy President of the Senate in the year 1955. She was also made a Commander of the Order of the British Empire. She was married to Sir Francis Molmure, the first Speaker of the State Council and Parliament. Their only daughter, Sita Molmure, became a member of the Senate of Sri Lanka. She married L.J. Seneviratne, a civil servant who became the Secretary of the Treasury. Since Mrs. Adeline Molmure, there have been many women who've represented the Parliament of Sri Lanka. Let's now take a look at some notable figures. Women in Parliament, however small in numbers, have held high positions in Parliament and the Cabinet. 2 women have become Prime Ministers and 1 has gone on to become the President of Sri Lanka. Sirimavu Bandaranaike became the world's first female head of government on the 21st of July 1960, holding the post for a non-consecutive 17 years. Her daughter Chandrika Kumaratunga became Sri Lanka's first female head of state and president. Sirimavu Bandaranaike's early political appeals were based on continuing the policies of her deceased husband. Her government nationalized the country's main industries. In recognition of International Women's Year in 1975, Bandaranaike created an agency to focus on women's issues, which would later become the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs. She appointed the first woman to serve in the Sri Lankan cabinet, Siva Obesekara, first as First State Secretary for Health and later as Minister of Health. Despite women being present in the legislature, when we look at the number of women in Parliament, it has been low throughout the years. For instance, in the year 2020, there were only 12 women out of 225 members of Parliament, which means only 5.3% of the MPs are women. This is a graphical representation that portrays the average percentage of women members in the legislature since its inception. According to available data, nearly 52% of the total population of Sri Lanka are women, yet female voices remain absent from formal politics. According to the Interparliamentary Union, or the IPU, a global database that ranks countries by the percentage share of women in their national parliament, Sri Lanka is ranked 179th out of 192 countries, with only 5.3% of MPs being women. This indicates that Sri Lanka is lagging behind a large number of countries when it comes to female representation in parliament. These are the top 10 countries that have the highest number of female representations in their respective legislatures. The Rwandan legislature has a total of 49 female MPs in an 80-seat body, which accounts to 61.3% of female representation. Cuba's legislature, that has 586 seats, has 313 female representatives, which amounts to 53.4% of the total legislature. Nicaragua's legislature, which has 91 seats, has a total of 46 female representatives. This is 50.6% of female representation in their legislature. Mexico has 50% female representation. The United Arab Emirates has 20 women in their 40-seat legislature, which amounts to 50% of female representation. New Zealand, with 120 seats in their legislature, is represented by 59 women there. This is 49.2%. Iceland also has female representation in the legislature for 47.6%. Iceland has 47.6% of female representation in their legislature. Grenada has 46.7%, South Africa has female representation at 46.7%, and Andorra has female representation of 46.4%. This is a graphical representation of the comparison of women population to women parliamentary percentage in South Asia. Now, this indicates that Sri Lanka has one of the lowest percentages in the region. The need for more women in parliament are threefold. Number one, it is a matter of equity and human right, both of which are cornerstones of a democratic society. Number two, broad representation of women in parliaments has an enormous impact on what issues are raised and how policies are shaped. And number three, it creates room to reform and revise discriminatory laws against girls and women. Now, what is the difference a woman parliamentarian can make for the betterment of a society? Women parliamentarians will broaden the issues discussed. Women's participation in politics helps advance greater gender equality and affects both the range of policy issues that get considered and the type of solutions that are proposed. There is strong evidence that as more women are elected to office, there is also a connected increase in policy making that emphasizes quality of life and reflects the priorities of families, women, and ethnic and racial minorities. Women are more likely to work across party lines. Women are often perceived as more sensitive to community concerns and more responsive to constituency needs. Women are deeply committed to peace building and post-conflict reconstruction and have a unique, powerful perspective to bring to the negotiating table. Women suffer disproportionately during armed conflict and often advocate more strongly for stabilization, reconstruction, and the prevention of further conflict. Women encourage citizen confidence in democracy through their own participation. When women are empowered as political leaders, countries experience higher standards of living. Positive developments can be seen in education, infrastructure, and health, and concrete steps are taken to help make democracy deliver. Let's now focus our attention on quota for women to access the Sri Lankan Parliament. More than 2/3 of these countries have applied gender quotas, either legislated candidates quotas or reserved seats opening spaces for women's political participation in national parliaments. In Sri Lanka, several proposals on quotas for women were made between 1998 and the year 2000, but later abandoned. The proposal for a 25% quota for women in local government bodies was dropped in the draft constitution presented to Parliament and withdrawn in the year 2000. However, in 2016, Sri Lanka's government passed a 25% women's quota for local elections through the Local Authorities Amendment Act No. 1 of 2016. Now, this was later amended by Act No. 16 of 2017. The Election Commission has the authority to reject nomination lists submitted by a political party or contesting independent group if they do not meet the basic legal requirements for the number of women candidates. Let's now discuss a little bit about Women Parliamentarians Caucus in the Parliament of Sri Lanka. The Women Parliamentarians Caucus currently comprises of all women parliamentarians. Its objective is to empower women and to eliminate all sorts of violence and harassments against them. The caucus also aims to increase the participation of women in politics, safeguard women's rights and gender equality, prevent all sorts of violations and harassments against women, look into the welfare of women workers, including the migrant workers, poverty alleviation among underprivileged women and widows, and providing them with vocational training and facilities. They also aim to improve education among women, look into the health-related problems of women, provide legal aid and counseling, enact legislation for the betterment of women, and contribute to the development of the country in general. The activities of the Women's Parliamentary Caucus includes advocacy through Parliament, coordinate activities with the women provincial councillors, members of the local government bodies, government ministries, departments and institutions, conduct awareness programs, workshops, trainings and conferences, conduct outreach activities at district level, coordinate activities with the United Nations agencies, form partnerships with local women organizations and professionals, and cooperate with other Parliament women organizations and international women organizations. How do you increase women's representation and participation in the political arena? Number 1. Change the education structure influenced by stereotypes and social norms where girls are not encouraged to study and pursue politics. 2. Prevent political parties from having large barriers of entry for women interested in politics. Without men's extensive networks and patronage, the small number of women who are in the Sri Lankan Parliament have entered mainly through pedigree politics and their relation to male politicians. Number 3, financially empower the women. Women politicians lack finances to effectively run campaigns. A 2013 UN Women study found out that over 80% respondents identified the lack of access to funding as one of the biggest challenges to women's entry into politics worldwide. Number 4, gender quotas. Power-seeking behavior, even when unintentional, hurts female politician candidate but helps male candidates. Seat reservations for female elected officials make communities more likely to associate women with leadership and vote for women in the future. Reserving political seats for women increases female electoral participation and improves government's responsiveness to women's policy concerns. Number 5, modeling female leadership. Women in leadership positions have a multiplying effect. Repeated exposure to female elected officials improves perceptions of female leaders and leads to future electoral gains for women. Female role models in leadership positions help adolescent girls to aspire to leadership. Number 6, political training programs. Mentorship, confidence building, media training and political campaign education are all effective tools to increase adolescent girls' and women's political aspirations and efficacy despite structural obstacles. Number 7, remove male model of political life and in government bodies. Number 8, access to political party support, that is limited access to political networks and more rigorous standards and qualifications required from women candidates has hindered their interest in politics. Number 9, sustainable access to well-developed education and leadership training for women and their orientation towards political life. And number 10, women-friendly electoral systems. Socioeconomic conditions also play a major role in the process of recruitment of women in the legislative body.